Well, you know, it may be in this day and age that at some stage you will want to start your own business. Now is apparently a better time than ever, with 3 businesses launched every single second. That's 11,000 per hour around the world. Are startups the new economy? And a very warm welcome to Roundtable with me, David Foster. These days, you have greater access to the internet than ever. There is more international money available, and there is artificial intelligence. Apparently, anybody, anywhere can start up a company. And the startups range from local transport business to global tech giants. How many, though, are successful? Is there a recipe for startup success?
Starting a business has never been so popular. From the US-founded Airbnb Homes to India's online cab service Olive Cabs to Brazil's Scoob social media, small and medium enterprises now account for more than half of all formal jobs globally. Entrepreneurs enjoy access to $150 billion worth of venture capital investment each year. But is setting up a 21st century business really as easy as it seems? With 65% of the next generation working for companies that don't exist yet, are startups the new economy?
And I'm very pleased to say that joining us via Skype from Oxford, we have Professor Thomas Hellman from the Said Business School. We go to Somerset in the west of England next to join Elizabeth Bolshaw, Global Lead Analyst for Ernst & Young, who've been working with startups for 30 years with me in the studio. Ian Wallace, Events and Editorials Director for the Startups website. I think that's startup.co.uk. Ian, you will correct me on that if I'm wrong. And Norval Scott's here too, Head of Communications at Streetbees, which is in itself a startup. Thomas, if I may call you that, the very first mistake most startup founders make was an article that you wrote. We'll get onto that in just a moment if we may, but the question I asked was, is there a recipe for success? If you know the things you shouldn't do you know the things people should do?
That's a great question. I get asked that question a lot. The simple answer is there's no recipe for success, but there are lots of recipes for avoiding failure. Some people think that to be an entrepreneur, you have to be born as an entrepreneur. We don't think that's true. Entrepreneurship is something you can learn. Entrepreneurs learn all the time. And so you can learn how to avoid a lot of mistakes. Going all the way to success, that's a longer story. That requires grit, it requires luck, and a few other things.
Do you understand why people are sometimes frightened of wanting to describe themselves as an entrepreneur? Because it sort of sounds like, it sounds like out of most people's realm, doesn't it? Whereas a startup could simply be ironing somebody's clothes. It could be building sheds. It doesn't have to be somebody who's a genius, does it?
Absolutely not. I don't think there's any reason to be afraid of. And frankly, I think we've come a long way. 20, 30 years ago, young people were afraid or not interested. Today, every young person knows about startups, knows about entrepreneurs, and amazing things happen.
Ian, you were nodding your head as Thomas was talking there. It is startups.co.uk.
That's right, yep.
What were you agreeing with?
Well, I think that it is possible for anybody to start a business, and it depends what type of business you're talking about. So there is a vast spectrum, and sometimes we get confused when we're talking about entrepreneurs. We think of the kind of much bigger names, and not necessarily.
We think of multi-millionaires, don't we?
Exactly.
Because you don't hear of them until they're described as an entrepreneur, and they're not described as an entrepreneur until they're successful.
Exactly. Lots of people think of themselves as entrepreneurs, and I think justifiably so, if they've taken a bit of a risk and started a restaurant or a hairdresser's or a private hire cab firm or something like that, and that's the kind of perhaps the lower end of that spectrum. And then there are those that want to kind of scale a business, which means raising finance and taking it on. And I think I was talking to Norval earlier, but it's running a company with 100 people is a different challenge altogether, and there are kind of leadership challenges that might not be suitable for every person. But I think the other point that Thomas made about failure is I think that's something that there's been a shift in the UK towards acceptance of failure to a greater extent than there was 20 years ago. And I think that's hugely important. People like James Dyson have helped with that. I mean, he's a great example of somebody that has failed so many times in order to get to the kind of the prototype that actually worked and was ready for the market.
It's all very well being prepared to fail, but what about getting investors? Liz, let me put this one to you. Getting investors who are prepared to put their money where there might be failure, because they're the ones really risking the most, aren't they? And 65%, I think, of all startups do fail.
They do. I mean, it's a high attrition rate, but I think what investors are looking for are really high scaling companies that can really change an industry. And then, of course, they clean up.
They only clean up if it works. So how do they know whether it's going to work?
Well, they do an awful lot of modeling. They look at the founder teams, which is absolutely critical. They look at subsectors that are hot and growing. And there are various ways that you can mitigate your risk, but you can never get rid of it completely.
All right, just a quickie here, and we'll come back and go into this in more detail. If they look at subsectors that are, as you put it, hot, if they look at the founders, if you are somebody thinking, there is a problem out there, I think I can solve it, how do you identify what the investors are looking for?
Well, there are several ways. I mean, one way is simply to look at the quantitative data of where money's going. If money is going at the moment into AI, which it is, 3 years ago it was going into blockchain, then you can ride that escalator.
Yeah, let me just bring up quickly on blockchain, because it's something we want to do. Cryptocurrencies, et cetera, they're sort of tanking now, aren't they? I mean, they were sort of a South Sea bubble.
Certainly, people who are investing in Bitcoin need to be much more careful than they were. But that doesn't mean that the underlying technology, which is blockchain, isn't absolutely transforming all sorts of industry sectors, banking in particular.
Okay, so I get it. There is something there that works. It's just that certain parts of it haven't so far
Correct.
worked. They made a lot of money for a lot of people very quickly and lost a lot of money for a lot of people very quickly. How did you, with your company, which has now got, what, I think 100 people?
100 people, yeah.
And has attracted investment of £20 million over the course of 3 to 4 years. How did you identify? Well, first of all, tell us exactly what you do in layman's terms, if you would, Norval.
So
how did you identify this as something that was needed?
I would say I didn't, the founders did, just to be clear. So StreetBees is a tech company, but we're disrupting the market research space. What that means is we're telling some of the world's biggest companies, this is exactly how, what your consumers are thinking and why they're thinking it. So we, rather than just tell people about this is what your consumers are doing, we can actually say this is because of the mood or the emotion, or this is the context these people are making decisions. And we do this by taking photos and videos and text. They tell us what they're doing and thinking, and we can crunch all that with artificial intelligence and basically tell the big companies this is why this is going on. Now,
I think one of the big companies would be somewhere like L'Oreal or Unilever.
Yeah,
They've been around a long time. How can you, in the space of a couple of years, get right what they should have already been proficient at?
Because they're not good at it. And if you think about the billions of dollars that these companies spend on actually trying to go, well, why aren't people buying this cereal, this kind of tea? And they just launch products all the time. And then these products die. Or if you think about it, they launch products in the US or the UK, but they're not bothering to go to India or the Middle East or huge markets because they just know they don't understand them. What we can do is we can actually show them with modern technology, this is how you understand consumers that you haven't been able to reach before, and this is what you should be reaching them with. Now, the question you asked was about scaling. How do you actually build a company that works? I think you have to come back to this question, what problem are you trying to solve? It's all right coming up with an idea, and we can all have brilliant ideas about, this is something that would be really interesting to develop, or this would change the world, but where does the money come in? Like, where do you actually, what problems do you solve for companies? Then you have to prove that you solve them, and that's what we're trying to do.
And you have to have what they call seed capital for something like this. Either that or you've got to have somebody with a pretty bulging bank account who's got the idea. So how do you persuade somebody in the first place that what you've got is a good idea before you can even go out and persuade companies such as L'Oreal, Unilever, whoever, that they should buy your product?
So with our experience is really interesting. So the founder of the company started, Tuche Balut, she started the company with £5,000 of her own money. But she did it because she was a consultant. She was trying to sell products to 4 companies, to India, to the Middle East, and she couldn't get the market research information that she wanted. So she identified this gap in the market. She said, you know what, we can actually find this information with, we could get people to send us this information if we compensate them fairly for their time. Built the system to do it. Then once we proved that it worked, took it to people who could invest, and they said, yes, this makes a lot of sense, and it's gone from there.
Okay, I'm going to ask you in a minute if all startups these days need to be tech savvy. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But the question I asked at the top, Thomas, what I said at the top was I'm going to come back to the very first mistake most startup founders make rather than just the recipe for success. So what is that big no-no?
The big no-no is getting the team right and getting the arrangements within the team right. So entrepreneurship is about people. It really is. It's about having a founder team that works, having a founder team that has a common vision, brings diversity towards a common set of goals. And a lot of people get it wrong at the very start. And since I work with a lot of companies at the very early stages, I can see some of the mistakes that people do, either rushing in too quickly, partnering up with the wrong person, or being thoughtless about what the arrangement between the founders really should be.
Yes, because one of the articles or background pieces I read was that splitting up the equity can be a bit of a difficulty. And a lot of people would say, well, look, there are 2 of us who've started that. Let's make it 50-50. There's a handshake on that. And then one person finds out that the other person's bone idle and does very little. And person number 1 feels aggrieved because they're putting in 90% of the effort. On the other hand, how do you sort that out?
Yeah, I mean, when we started researching this, we were shocked. And I was initially also thinking, well, just split it equally. But the more research we did, the more we found that these entrepreneurs that just split equally tend to have problems later on.
Can you identify in certain people that it is going to be a success? Does it come down to personality?
I would say, in terms of a team, yes. I would agree with Thomas that it's about that getting that team dynamic right. It's rarely one person's vision, although it can be. Elon Musk is a very good example of a very individual kind of founder. But you look at Apple, you look at Netflix, you look at so many very successful companies, and they've been built by teams with complementary skills.
And did you notice that in Reid Hoffman?
Yeah, I mean, Reid Hoffman is a very good example of somebody who had a problem. He was being hit by very unfair late charges, sending Blockbuster videos back, and thought there must be a better way of doing this. And he developed Netflix originally as a postal system, but actually built an enormous entertainment business on that personal challenge.
Sorry, I refer to him as Reid Hoffman. I think it's Reed Hastings, but of course in this business we all know each other by our first names, don't we? What's the second name when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Do you need to be somebody like that, Ian? Do
you mean tech savvy?
Well, tech savvy, sort of a real go-getter, or could you just be somebody who has a simple idea? We're talking about big stuff here with Ernst & Young. We're talking about multi-million, maybe billion dollars, and which is where you hope your company might go. But what about small startups? They don't all have to be monsters, do they?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think...
I don't mean monsters in terms of their creators. I mean monster
I know
size.
what you mean, yeah. No, I think if you look at the economy, 99.9% of businesses are small, mid-sized businesses, and they're producing something like over 50% of the kind of combined turnover of the economy, and providing 60% of the employment. So they're huge contributors. They don't all have to be monsters. The vast majority are actually sole traders. Or very small businesses, so micro businesses, and that's people that are looking to set up a business to provide for their lifestyle. So it sometimes sounds disingenuous to say a lifestyle business, but actually, if it's doing something that's providing an income, then that's sufficient. But if you're talking about scale-ups and those that are really looking to kind of move the needle, then you have to be pretty savvy, and you've got to really know that market. I think as Elizabeth was saying, you've got to there's got to be a problem that you're looking to solve. You don't have to be tech savvy necessarily. I mean, the founder of Startups was a computer games entrepreneur. He didn't know how to kind of make the games, but he got other people to do that. So he knew where things were going. This back in the 80s. Sold his business to an American company, did very well and returned to the UK because he was inspired by that entrepreneurship. And now he's running an HR software business, a SaaS business, so software as a service. And he's not the most tech-savvy person, but he's very good at kind of seeing where something might be going. And I think that's key. There's somebody called Sir Ronald Cohen, who is seen as the founding father of venture capital in the UK. And he wrote a book called Second Bounce of the Ball, and it's anticipating where that next bounce is going to be. So if you've got some market knowledge, market intelligence from your career, then you can often see where something might be going, and that is something that appeals to
Thomas, do you want to come in at this point, or were you just falling off your chair with boredom?
Actually, I do, and I was sort of thinking about your term monster, and I think I have a slightly different view on this, which is if you're doing a small or a large ambitious, they're all monsters. They're all challenging. And I kind of actually disagree with the word monster because I think it's putting down ambition. And actually, I think we need to celebrate ambition. And my view is it is difficult. Don't fool yourself. It is difficult to start a business. Might as well start something big. Start with something big because you have a chance of building something big. If it ends up smaller, that's fine. But if you start with a limiting factor of saying, I only want to build something small, you've shot yourself in the foot at the start.
Okay, monster was not supposed to be a disparaging term. It was just a description of size. I apologize if you thought that was the wrong use of use.
No offense taken, but I'm getting at a really interesting question here.
What I want to do is go round each one of you, but not immediately. So dwell on this one. I want to talk about the how-tos, because there'll be people watching this thinking that, if I could take from this program just a couple of ideas, that will make my day worthwhile. But I want to get into venture capital. In the theatre world, they're called angels, venture capitalists. In other words, the people who risk their big money on your idea. Where do you go to find them? And what do you say to them?
So you have to have your pitch. You have to have it, tailored to the person that you're speaking to. You asked before about, how do you actually find people who are willing to give this money, and but isn't it so risky for them? This is their job. Their job is to evaluate lots and lots of companies, work out which are the best ones they want to put their money into, and then try and help them as much as possible to succeed. So our investors, they don't just invest in us. They have, Atomico is one of the biggest VC houses in Europe. They have hundreds of investments, in some of the biggest companies. They founded Skype.
But there are very few people who can go and knock on the door of somebody like this and say, can I come in and talk to you about what I've got in mind? Because these people are, as you say, so incredibly busy. So how do you attract their attention?
So it's a question of stages, basically. Think about it in the first step. How am I going to get this money? Who gives money to my kind of business? Work out who that is. Then you have to succeed and prove that their investment has been worthwhile. And then the next step, and you should be thinking about this almost from the start, is when I do my Series A or my bigger round of investment, who's going to do that bit? How do I build my business so that it gets to a stage where they might invest? And then
so you don't need to stay with the same people out of loyalty.
Well, no. I mean, hopefully your initial investors will stay on with the investment rounds, and they'll put more money into the business, and then more money. So for Street Bees, the next step would be when we go global, that hopefully our existing investors will stay with us, but we'll also get, for example, American investment.
Is this the way of the future? I mean, we're going to see more and more. Liz, this is for you. Almost all real jobs growth, I've been told, is in startups. So is this the way the world is going to be?
I think it is, and I think it's a very healthy thing for the global economy, because not only is there job growth, but there's also enhanced competition. It's good if market leaders are challenged. It's good if we have leapfrog innovations that change the way we do things. It's all about progress.
And your tip for the 3:30 at Chepstow, I don't mean that quite literally. What I mean is the next big thing.
I wouldn't say. I think AI has a long way to go, put it that way. Artificial intelligence, a long way to go.
Yeah, and Thomas, I mean, this is something that everybody's talking about. How would you, as somebody who studies business, advise somebody to get into this next hot sector, if it be artificial intelligence?
Oh, I mean, I think artificial intelligence is a lot of different things, and It's not the technology itself, it's what it allows us to do. So I think it's a great area to engage, focus on something. And then you'll see, because often what you find is the successful entrepreneurs are the ones who showed up at the right time and then actually found what they're doing after showing up.
Because you're so immersed in it, each one of you, you make it sound as though there's a physical marketplace that you can go to, turn up with your idea. But this is what I don't understand. Ian, help me with this one. What I don't understand is, let's say I've got a brilliant idea. Let's go back to real basics. Let's say I think I have a brilliant idea. Who do I go to? What, do I go to you?
You could do, definitely. I mean, startups has
Is that the
guides
gap
to,
you found in the market?
Well, I think the site was created to help people that wanted to start a business. So there are all sorts of guides, how-to guides and industry
And does
type
that mean
guides.
that prior to you, it was very, very difficult, and you're trying to make it that much easier?
I think 20 years ago, we started in 2000,
Yeah.
and there wasn't a kind of market like that. There was in America, but not here. And we were looking to kind of speak to entrepreneurs or people that wanted to start their own business in a way that perhaps hadn't been done. There was a kind of government top-down way of speaking to people about starting a business.
Yeah.
So we were trying to change that. So yeah, I'd say come to
So
to us.
there's your
but-
company, startups.co.uk. I guess there are others as well. So there are easy portals, I think.
Yeah,
is probably
if you're
a
looking
word.
for inspiration and some advice, then absolutely. But I'd say there are lots of other places to go. Somewhere like the British Library Business and IP Centre is a great place to go, because you can get access to all sorts of market research reports that usually cost thousands of pounds, and lots of other information and knowledge. So if you're putting together a business plan, that's somewhere that you can get kind of free research. They also run various kind of sessions for people who are looking to start a business or learn about IP, so the intellectual property, the legal aspects, and marketing a business. But you said, is there a physical marketplace? Yeah, there is. There are lots of websites now where, if you're starting, you can start to pitch your services or your products. So I mean, Amazon Marketplace, eBay, Etsy. For various things, there are places for freelancers.
I love how far we've come when you talk about a physical marketplace being something in the ether.
Yeah.
Did you get enough help?
I think the way that StreetBees started was actually the company that the founder was working for. Her boss was the first investor, because he believed in her idea so much that he actually put money into the business, and it took off from there. So I think, we've clearly done very well in terms of attracting some of the biggest investors to the company. What I'd add to the conversation just there is there is a lot of help that you can get as a startup now. There are lots and lots of accelerators around the country, not just based in London, but all
When you
over.
call it an accelerator, help us here.
So an accelerator would be a physical office, usually, that you as a startup could say, I've got my idea, let me pitch to you. They'll say, yes, come in, here's some office space. We'll take a little bit of equity in the company, but we believe in your idea and we think it would grow. A lot of these are sponsored by corporations. So Telefonica is one of the biggest ones. Barclays is huge in terms of sponsoring the space. And they're actively working with startups all the time to say, okay, bring us a new idea. Maybe we can integrate that into our business down the line.
Do all startups get swallowed up?
Not necessarily, but I mean, in the UK, it is, lots of them do. I mean, DeepMind is a really good example of an absolutely brilliant idea that did get taken over by Google, but not necessarily.
See, this is what I wonder, and we're coming towards the end of the programme. This is what I wonder, Liz, is that there are so many great ideas that they blossom beautifully and last a spring before they're swallowed up by the great big fish in the sea, who then goes around looking and scavenging for others like this. Can you build global brands this way? Liz, first.
I think the answer is you can, but I would say in the US, there's a much better track record of company founders staying with their growth journey right through to an IPO. So you're looking at Google, Facebook, they've remained with their companies. In the UK, unfortunately, DeepMind's a good example. We tend to build a company up to maybe $500 million and then sell.
Thomas, is that just the way of life, or is that a bit sad?
I pretty much agree. I mean, DeepMind, to their great respect, refused to move to the US and stayed in the UK and have greatly contributed to the London environment. So I think we have to look at it in shades of grey. But I think the issue of companies staying with the growth path is the key issue. In my view, We're halfway through an entrepreneurship revolution in Europe, and that second challenge, that we not just start companies, that we grow them into real anchor companies, remains our biggest challenge.
Okay, very quickly, if you would, Norval, because I think we've got about 30 seconds, but you want to make a point.
I think almost the problem is not that the companies get swallowed up, it's what happens to the founders. In Europe, what often happens is the founders sell their company and then they think, okay, I'm going to buy a speedboat. In the US, they sell their company and go, now I'm going to create another company.
Or you could do both, couldn't you?
Well, they probably...
If you're very successful.
It depends what kind of speedboat you buy.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much indeed. A lot of lessons learned, a lot of advice proffered, and the fact is there are an awful lot of people out there, by necessity as well as desire, who are going to have to find a way of making this sort of thing work. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Let's 2019 be the year of the entrepreneur. You heard it here first from these four great minds. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for watching. This has been Roundtable with me, David Foster. You can catch up on this programme, indeed all our programmes, since we started at YouTube. That's Roundtable, TRT World on YouTube. Until next time, goodbye.